السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني نيابة عن سعادة الدكتور جمال سند السويدي مدير عام مركز الإمارات للدراسات والبحوث الاستراتيجية أن أرحب بكم في هذا المحفل العلمي المتميز، وأشكر لكم حضوركم ومشاركتكم في ندوة السراب الفكر المستنير في مواجهة الإرهاب. ونستهل أعمال الندوة بالكلمة الترحيبية لسعادة الدكتور جمال سند السويدي مدير عام مركز الإمارات للدراسات والبحوث الاستراتيجية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب السمو والمعالي والسعادة، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني بداية أن أرحب بكم أطيب ترحيب في مركز الإمارات للدراسات والبحوث الاستراتيجية، الذي يحرص دائما على مناقشة القضايا المهمة التي تتصل بأمن المجتمعات واستقرارها وتنميتها، ليس على الساحة الخليجية أو العربية فقط، وإنما في العالم كله أيضا، من منطلق إيمانه بأن الفكر هو الأساس القوي الذي تنهض عليه الأمم وتواجه تحدياتها وتستشرف مستقبلها، وأن العلم هو الطريق الذي سلكته المجتمعات كلها
for the future, and on the basis that this is the path that has been followed throughout the history in order to reach better horizons of harmony in the world. In this historical context that is dominated by conflicts and clashes, I think you would agree with me that one of the most dangerous phenomena nowadays is the phenomenon of radicalization and violent Islamic extremism. This phenomenon is extracted from some extremist interpretations and deformed interpretation of the Sharia in order to justify all violent acts, in order to destroy nations and societies, and also to put salt to injury in conflict, in religious conflicts. These people these extremists also exploit these differences between different religious sects in order to make more fires and aggravate the conflict. So, in that context, the book, The Mirage, came to light, and I think that despite the failures and the fiasco that witnessed these extremist groups, they are still continuing their illusion game to people by telling them that they are the solution, and they are still demagogically telling others that they should follow their extremist ideas. In this, from this perspective, a question arises, and the same question was raised by Europe in the past, in the Middle Ages. It's why separating between religion and politics is the pillar and is the condition and the term to achieve democracy and stability in the Arab world. We should have the audacity to declare that and to confess that it's the only solution. Secularism is the only solution to achieve democracy, and this idea was defended since the 19th century in the Arab world. And in this book, The Mirage, we come through different ideas, and the book illustrates that these groups, these extremist groups, deform the image, the good image of Islam, and because of them, Islam became linked with violence and some bad phenomena, while we can know from the Islamic civilization that Islam has nothing to do with this strange phenomena and ideas. In the Mirage book, I tried to explain that these Islamist groups do not represent the Islam, and they threaten Muslims more than others. These groups insist to continue exploiting the image of Islam, and this is the conflict that is not less dangerous than the security conflicts. It's why I was very careful and meticulous in simplifying all the paragraphs of the book in order to make it understandable by all types of audience. And the first edition of the book was issued this year, and so far we issued 5 editions, which reflect the interest given to the discussion of such phenomena, which realizes one of the main objectives that I had in mind while compiling this book, which is telling people the danger represented by such Islamist group. In addition to producing this book in Arabic, it will be translated into English, and the English edition version has been published a few days ago, and it will be translated into other languages. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that the discussion of such a topic by this elite of intellectuals will open new vistas for thinking and discussion about the Islamism, and this necessitates more other projects, research projects about that. I welcome you again in this center, and peace be upon you. We would like to start now the activities of the symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, this symposium tackles one of the biggest challenges, not only in the Arab region, but in the whole world. These are the Islamist groups. And this is reflected and represented in the title of the book, which is the Mirage. The importance of this symposium is based also on the people and the experts and the intellectuals who are invited to this symposium. They have large knowledge in this topic. His Eminent Wasim Youssef, who is the Khatib and the Imam of the Grand Sheikh Zayed Mosque, is one of the prominent Imams and scholars in the Islamic and Arab world. He is known of his moderate approach to the interpretation of Islam. Wasim Youssef, he is an influential figure, and he has many contributions in Ittihad, a newspaper, and Sheikh Wasim has master's degree in the interpretation of the Quran. Dr. Abdul Haq Azzouzi as well, he is a doctor, Moroccan doctor and intellectual who has many contributions in political sciences and strategic research and futuristic research. He held many positions such as the Moroccan Center for Strategic Research, which paved the way to different event and development programs. He is a member in many organizations and was awarded in several times. He is also the winner of the Mediterranean Award for Intellect. He got his degrees from Toulouse University from France, and he's celebrating today his birthday. So we congratulate him and we tell him happy birthday. Dr. Ammar Hassan also is an Egyptian, is specialized in political sciences and Islamism. He got his PhD from the University of the Arab League in Cairo. He organized several symposiums and events in several universities, such as American University of Cairo, etc. He also participated in several conferences and events in the Arab world. He also took part in establishing some research centers, and he established a new center for strategic studies, and through this center he organized and he conducted a number of research projects. He also writes articles in many newspapers, Arabic newspapers like Al-Hayat, the Lebanese Al-Hayat, and other Emirati newspapers and other Arabic newspapers. He has several articles in criminology and legal issues. We have also with us Majid, Mr. Majid, who is interested in the issues of Islamism and terrorist threats that are representing a challenge to the Arab and Islamic countries. So after this brief introduction about our speakers, I would like to invite the first speaker, who is His Eminent Sheikh Wasim Youssef, to talk about the problematic of Islamist groups and politics. Peace be upon you. In the beginning, I'm honored and pleased to talk in this event, and I would like to ask God to help me in being successful in my speech to you. In the beginning, I would like to say that I wouldn't be able to satisfy all the audience, and this is not a confession of inability, but just to admit that there is a relativity. We cannot stop something called Islamism. Every Islamist group which belongs to some Islamist school, they just exploit the circumstances. They pretend something, and when they reach the authority, they change their skin. And the Mirage Symposium was very comprehensive in tackling this issue. And I was having a discussion, and I said, why we don't have a book, a textbook in our university that talks about Islamist groups? And he said, I don't want the students to talk about these Islamist groups. It's why I would like to start by saying that after reading the Mirage book, I think that it has the full eligibility and the capacity to be a textbook that is taught in the universities. In the beginning, I would like to say that if we go back to the history of Islamist groups, there is the name Hassan al-Banna. Sufism was tackled in a different way compared to Islamism. Hassan al-Banna is the founder of the Brotherhood group, and he was a Sufi. So there is no big difference between Sufism, the way it is practiced now, and the Brotherhood groups. They try now to turn every clash or conflict into a religious war, a crusade war. And we said in the past that the origin of wars or benefit, the pragmatic benefit, reaching some pragmatic benefits, and this necessitates that we help the youth. I was in the United States and 3 students joined Daesh, ISIS. So these 3 students joined ISIS. When we asked about them, we found that they are all drug addicts. What happened? Can you imagine the scenario? This Islamist and this extremist target these people who are vulnerable and tell them you are astray and we need to purify you and help you, and you can do that through joining our jihadist group ISIS. So imagine that Allah wants us humans to live and to insist on living, and we have this legacy in our Quran and Hadith. There is a Hadith which says that even if you see that the day of judgment came and the hereafter came, you should continue doing what you do, live in your life, and if you have a plant or a root in your hand, you can dig some hole for it and plant it in the ground. So this is not the approach that is encouraged by these extremists. We don't have the intellectual containment. They think that everyone who is in their eyes, every disobedient to Allah, an infidel. I can have mistakes, I can make some errors, but it doesn't mean that I'm the enemy of the religion. It's why the Prophet, peace be upon him, when a person came to him and he was lashed, and Khalid said, damn it, this person is cursed, and the Prophet Muhammad said, don't curse him, he loves the Prophet and Allah. So this means that not if I am disobedient to some regulations in Sharia, it doesn't mean that I hate the Prophet or Allah. It doesn't mean that I'm the enemy of Islam. But unfortunately, this is the generalization that Muslim Brotherhood follow and this extremists follow. There were some companions who drank wine during the period of the Prophet Muhammad, and they were not attacked that severely and aggressively by the Prophet, but they were asked very gently to quit alcohol and drinking wine. We have preachers of this extremism, unfortunately, in the Arab and Islamic world. They have a methodology and they should be uncovered. Now we know that in the beginning people sympathized with the Muslim Brotherhood, but now after they became uncovered, they are despised by people, and we should do the same. We should uncover all groups, all extremist groups which have radical objectives. The media have some roles to play because we have to utilize this media means in order to fight extremism. I remember that there was a preacher who arrived at the Abu Dhabi airport and he was forbidden to enter the UAE because of his extremist thinking. And when he came back to his place of residence, he said, I was forbidden to enter UAE, but I swear I will enter every single family in the Arab and Islamic world. So this is to say that we can have differences, but it doesn't mean that we should hate each other. So differences are something normal, but my purpose is to sensitize and raise awareness among the youth of the Islamic world. They are the future of the world, and Allah says in the Quran in several instances that the youth are the pillars of every growing and developing society. So this youth, we should protect them from being exploited by these extremists and radical thinkers. We should know that if this youth, if we leave them vulnerable to these threats, this will not lead us to a bright future. I won't be long, and I conclude my speech here. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you very much, Sheikh Wasim Youssef, for this speech. You talked about the deviation of radical thinkers and extremists and how we can protect the youth, our youth, from being victims to these vultures, radical vultures. And this can be done through different institutions like media and other institutions. Now I call Dr. Abdel Haq Azzouz to talk about some prospective thinking and a kind of reading in the book of the Mirage. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, in the beginning, I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi for inviting me to participate in this cheerful event, and which hosts diverse people and experts, and I'm happy to participate in this hot issue, this current issue. The Mirage, I read it from A to Z, from the front cover to the back cover. I would like to talk about something that we seldom approach in the Arab world. I'm standing before you and I read prospection of the future, the challenges and the opportunity. We don't talk about the scenarios that would happen after 20, 30 years. What is the future of political Islam? What are the studies that we can produce in order to make them inherent to the decision maker and to countries in order to save the societies and nations from the backwardness and inhumanity. The book, The Mirage, which is consisting of more than 700 pages and more than 7 chapters, in addition to conclusion, references, appendices, and it undergoes the academic rules, and it is written in a very eloquent Arabic language, classical Arabic. In terms of content, it is an unparalleled book which uses argument without any insolence or insult, as it is the case in some other books, unfortunately, in the Arab world. world. So it uses argumentation and talks to the mind, to the brain, and uses analysis and explanation, and it raises several questions. These questions tackle comparative problematics that are adopted in academic trends like the PhD we discuss in the West, etc., and we trigger answers, professional answers. So the Mirage book talks about how this mix between religion and politics is leading, and gives example to Salafist, jihadist, Muslim Brotherhood, etc. So the book illustrates the effects of such radical groups and the parties, the political parties which are affiliated to these religious, radical religious groups. So most of them try to cover their groups and the parties with the sacrosanct cover. The politics and elections, political elections can lead some party to win, but I should say that without having qualified businessmen, decision makers, and investors, you shouldn't bet on being able to move forward and to develop. In addition to that, we have to say the party which tries to represent only its party, they usually become more dictators. And so we say, as we teach our students in the comparative political sciences, the individual doesn't have absolute power, and the rule is a very delicate responsibility. Some people think that ruling people is easy, but this is not true. It is based on some mathematical rules like physics, mathematics, sciences, etc. So ruling is based on a very accurate system, on institutions where the ruler is only one part who is influential, but is not the full system and is not an alternative to the system and to the regime. And also, ladies and gentlemen, there is a big difference between theory and practice. As was mentioned in the Mirage, managing the public affairs, and we are in need of redressing that in the Arab world, this needs capable people who have all the tools, education, intellect, expertise in order to manage and conduct that. They should be capable of leading people and leading by example, not by people who resort to theory and to eloquency and to superstition in order to demagogically persuade others, and especially the vulnerable people. On the basis of this perspective, this simplified perspective, I would like to say that, or to ask the question, what is the future of political Islam in our Arab nation, Arab world? You know that futuristic studies are science-based studies which are unfortunately not taught in the universities in the Arab world, but they are taught professionally in Anglo-Saxon universities. For instance, every president in the United States is surrounded by strategists. Henry Kissinger, he is old, but he is still depended on by the President Obama. The withdrawal or the partial withdrawal of the United States from the politics which were adopted in the Gulf since 25 years, based on some report that was drawn by Henry Kissinger. We unfortunately don't give priority to such studies, and these studies are very effective and very efficient, and depending on these studies, the future of society can be brighter. And if the decision maker finds such studies, he or she will be able to crystallize very efficient policies for the people. So these strategic studies aim to create paradigms and some intellect frameworks that enable the nation to overcome challenges and to orient and influence the decisions made by the politicians who are leading the country. We don't have enough time to study all these futuristic theories, but I would like to talk about the scenario theory. This theory enables the futuristic strategist to forge three possible scenarios. The first scenario is the linear scenario. So I repeat, it is the linear scenario, and it's a scenario that assumes the continuity of dominance of the current scenario. And the second one is the optimism scenario, and it's different than the first scenario because it doesn't assume that there will be continuity of the current scenario, but it says that there will be some reforms that will make the change. The third scenario is the radical scenario or the pessimistic scenario. So it is based on betting the happening of some event or some revolutions that can cause change. If we project these scenarios on the few past years, we can say, for instance, that if we talk about one generation from now, 20 years, 25 years, and if we predict the future of these radical political parties, the relation with political Islam, the maturity of the Islam, and the maturity of all politicians, and if we project these three scenarios based on the current situation, the linear scenario means fading away of the radical extremist Islamist, and it is similar to what happened in Egypt. This necessitates continuing maturity of different classes of society in order for them to collaborate, and also an assistance from the other stakeholders in the global arena in order to make this experience more mature. The second scenario, which is more important, is the reformist scenario. This scenario, ladies and gentlemen, focuses on the occurrence of some changes and some radical changes on the phenomenon which is subject to discussion, which necessitates a strong memory of electors, of the voters. and not enable or help these radical groups to reach the decision-making position, and making some revolutions which will oblige this radical Islamist to exploit the religion, the Islam, in politics. I wrote an article about conservative parties in Etihad newspaper and how they were created in the 18th century, and this was in Britain, in France, and in most countries. But they became, this conservative party turned from religious parties to conservative parties, which encourage the private sector and don't knock the door of aristocrats, European aristocrats. And in the 19th century, they became rightist conservative parties, and they got away from mixing religion with politics. This necessitates some political exercises, charismatic exercises, strategic exercises, which is highly distinguished in order to reach that level. So in order to become conservative parties and effective investment in the human resources, the human capital, in order to rescue the generations through education, and we can say that in 20 years, and as Dr. Abdel Ilah Belqziz said, the assumption of making the state inherent with religion is wrong, because this will affect negatively the performance of the state. And because in religion there are always differences and conflict, you know, that we have different sects, we have Shia, we have Sunnah, we have Safawi group. So on which basis we will conduct our country, our state, if we keep the state notion inherent and linked with the religion? We should separate these two. And we also say that there is a desired intervention of the state. We should differentiate between religion and the state and politics. This desired intervention is the type of intervention which keeps the independence of the state from the religion arena, and it's a very important pillar and fundamental to the establishment of the new and modern state and to the democracy. And if we think about other methods and other scenarios, we think that the desired intervention in political sciences leads to democracy. Even the secular states puts some differentiation between what is political and what is religious. This is on the one hand, which means that we should restructure the framework of political authority in all levels, especially in the politics of leading the general crowd. And second, don't you think that what is happening in terms of terrorism and the lack of growth and development, don't you think that this is due to the spread of such radicalization and the poor policies that are imposed on the Arab countries? And as one said, there is misuse of the human capital. in the Arab societies. In different representations, we can say that the backwardness the Arab countries are witnessing is a result of this. And we also have some changes which benefit the radical groups, including the extremist groups. And this is the most dangerous scenario. If we do not remove completely the illness, this cancerous tumor, and I mean here this jihadist and radical groups, if we don't remove it completely from the body of the Arab nation, we cannot solve the problem. We shouldn't take few fabric of it, but we should remove it completely. And if the politicians are not creative in installing growth, development and justice and integrating all the political players in conducting the affairs of the people, I think that we will not go far. So realizing the growth and development is something that necessitates a participatory approach. These three scenarios then, and based on the distinguished book of As-Sarab, the Mirage, lead us to say that we have different natures of problems, and we should choose what to do, which approaches to follow, and which scenarios to visualize. This will enable to the decision maker, and I think that the reformist scenario is a convincing scenario, and it will enable the decision maker to make a revolution in the societies, in the Arab societies. A mirage which will seed a lot of development, and let us go forward. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Haq Azzouzi, for this paper in which he used one very methodological tool, which is the method of scenarios, in order to talk about Islamist groups. And I think we need such approaches in order to predict the political Islam and radical groups, and in this way I think we can help the decision makers. I'm pleased now to invite Dr. Ammar Hassan to talk about their Mirage, how we can create an enlightenment which is able to fight terrorism.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this symposium, which discusses a book that tackles scientific methodology, the phenomenon of political Islam in all its details, without getting involved in discourse of propaganda, but it tried to look at the phenomenon and explain it to the idea and the practices. First of all, allow me to make three comments from based on this book. The first comment is that the project of political Islam failed so far to provide a solution, or to be the promise, or to give hopes, as it has promised since it was launched in the 20s of the 20th century. The second comment is that we cannot get out of this meet without having the possibility of deconstructing this discourse and countering it with the same logic it is using it and the way it is getting inside our society. The third comment, the way out can only be with enlightenment, in which Islamic reform is part of it. But being content with reforming fiqh, I think this is only a move. But to move forward, we need enlightenment, and I will explain what enlightenment means. Reading this book made me certain of 12 observations or visions or reasons or interpretations for why it is called Mirage. The first is that the phenomenon of political Islam or political Islamist groups starts from the corruption of its first birthplace, the way they are calling for corruption and becoming a desperate ideology. There is no, unfortunately, this idea by itself is corrupt. The second observation, all the movements and groups which choose violence as a method of change towards human history have failed. Even when they reached power, they could not stay stable, because the way to stability is to have a clear vision and justice, and to convince the majority of people and not obligate them to choose a specific path. The other observation is that these groups they have void symbols. We remember in the 80s when they have the slogan that political Islam is the solution and we are the good for people. And then from the practice we saw that it was completely different. So there is always a gap between the discourse and the practice. The fourth observation, the part of these groups is to concede people what happens inside their homes, what they say to each other, what some of them say on others, make us understand that they are fooling people, but they try to market something different to people. They think they spread religion and they have fiqh justification, thinking that war is to fool the enemy, and they think they are in a war against everybody. The fifth observation is that these groups have failed so far in providing a model that could be followed at the level of the Islamic world. Each time a group of them reach power, they say, the other groups say we are different from them. So each time one group gets to power, they fail. So far, none of them from the Sunni or the Shiite managed to give us a proper and a good model, a model that could be said as a good model and that we could follow. The sixth observation is that we are facing a project that is attracting from outside, it is shining from outside, because it is using religion, it is using the sacred image of religion and emotions and feelings towards God and towards the afterlife and the good deeds. And And those who compare between what is said and the practice will find out the reality without so much effort. The seventh observation is that these groups, and I read all the literature since about 25 years, all these groups, they start from a methodological mistake that manipulate the Islamic text. They put the idea first, or what will serve the benefit first, and then they start looking in the Quranic text or in the Hadith or in the quotes of the Islamic scholars to justify what they say. And as evidence, the Islamic groups in Egypt in 1981 issued a book that excommunicated the society and authority, and they justified that by verses from the Quran. In 1997, when they reconciled with the state, they adopted a completely different opinion, and they justified it with verses, and this is a complete manipulation of religion. The eighth observation is that these groups, they are against historical development, so I have no doubt that they will fail no matter how strong they are. History is moving, and we have seen many developments throughout history, different empires, Greeks, Persians, Byzantines, and until the French empires, the British empires, and in many centuries until the modern states. The world has ended to the state nation, but they want to bring the world backwards. And they have their own imagination of how the world should function. Secondly, the world is moving in its implementation of democracy through peace, through presentation of interests, through expression of different categories of society, but they still use weapons to practice politics. The world is using globalization in its implementation of politics, but they prefer secrecy. They prefer to use movements of pressures. Those groups, they want to implement politics in secrecy. When the Muslim Brotherhood reached power, we found out that the majority of them were secret, and the others were just for public relations. But the surface was the main parts were secret. The world also is moving forward with legitimacy, with the aspect of constitution and law. But these groups, they consider constitution as being illegal, as being illegitimate, and they want to move them. The world is moving forward with the civil society, but they still want to bring us back to Islamic society. The use of weapons by this society is a project of identity, as it was admitted by many scholars. Most of those who were killed in humanity was because of conflict of identities. Most of identities killed were among Jews, Christian, and Muslims, and different religions were because of the religious identity. This project of closed religious identity cannot move forward in an open world moving towards development. The 10th observation is that these groups think that they can achieve the impossible by making all its adversaries similar, as if they came out from the same factory. They don't want the followers to believe in heart and soul, but they want them also to have the attitude and behavior of the same person. Because they don't believe in differences between individuals, they don't believe in personal freedom, they don't believe in personal experience. and then they use violence against those who do not follow the model that they believe is the best one. And this leads to boiling that at the end does not lead to moving forward. These groups have some quotes. They talk about caliphate, wala and ba'a, the house of Islam, house of war, had the Islam as a religion and the state, the whole of the ula to protect the life and the afterlife. Such discourse used by these groups, they are either taken from historical experience that were manipulated, or they were born in or used in a certain context and do not belong to the current times. As a Muslim, I believe that Islam needs I believe that the ula should protect the religion, and the Islam reached some states where others could not reach, such as Indonesia. The last observation, number 12, all the vision that tried to tackle the issue were used talking about liberal Islam. They ended up with nothing, even though they have peaceful discourse and enlightenment, but they were taken away when confronting this violent groups that still live in the old history. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is a comprehensive evolution in thinking and in science and the political vision and in practice and the social contact between the citizen and the ruler. This is how enlightenment was in Europe. Enlightenment is not a question of Islamist reform. It's not using the brain in the text. Enlightenment is a comprehensive process in science, in literature, in politics, in economy, in society that would make a human being the focus of its work and would achieve development and to move forward in history. The third point, why enlightenment now in the Muslim states and the modern Muslims fell into a myth of enlightenment, thinking that enlightenment belongs to a different context. It was born on a different soil, so it's not good for us. This is a real myth, and if we use our brain, we will see that many models that were applied in societies were also good in other societies, such as the democratic society, democratic state that is good for the West and the East. And the other myth is that these groups try to promote the idea that enlightenment is to move backwards, to reproduce the past since it was a prominent past. Taha Hussein, the author Taha Hussein, had said, this is what we heard from the Sheikhain, both Sheikhs, and we don't know what is right and what was added to what they say, but we are going to deal with it with good intention, as if it was something from reality. This means that there's some thinking of adding a legendary aspect to those characters. These groups think that using the past is good for us. Sayyid Qutb talks about religion, unique religion, and says that development of Muslim could only happen with going back to the past and taking back the achievements of the past. These people think that they have the prophets or the companions of the prophets among them. The third myth is that many writings, many reformist writings since Muhammad Abdu and Hassan al-Aqad in Egypt of the 18th century until now happened in the context of opening the jurisprudence door that was closed by reinventing the religious discourse. And I think all those procedures are not enough. We are way away from the others, and we should only hurry up to get to enlightenment that society should adopt and scholars should adopt, and the state also, if it wants to move forward towards the future. Enlightenment is needed for 4 goals. First, I was about to cry when I was reading a book that was published by Knowledge magazine from Saudi Arabia. I read it years ago. It was about the image of Arabs in Muslims in many countries such as even Brazil, Israel, Australia, United States, UK, France. It was prepared by specialists. It is giving a disparate image because of the practice of these groups. They have intentioned a bad image in the minds of others. And those are Orientalists who made sure to put that image in the curriculum at the state. The second goal is to save the Muslims themselves from terrorism and from development. These groups, they are opening gaps, and instead for us to think about the future, we are thinking how can we fix the violation, how can we adjust what has been damaged. The third goal is to stop hurting religions in the Muslim state. In many literatures of these groups, there is excommunication, and they attack human beings, and they take their money, they take women and children, as they are against Islam as it is in the Islamic text. The fourth goal is to remove damage which touches the non-Muslim states. All the world now is affected by terrorism caused by terrorist organization. Terrorism was undertaken by groups from all religion and from all sect, but now the world is mostly suffering from terrorism that belongs to the Muslim world. How can we move to enlightenment? There are 5 conditions for us to talk about enlightenment. The first condition is that faith should be something individual. The relationship between a human being and God does not need mediums. Each human being would be responsible for his own act. The Quran said, mind them, but you have no control over them. But these groups, they made faith under control by groups or by Islamic scholars, sheikh, and they changed individual faith into a community issue. They choose different names like groups of good, and the limits of faith in Islam is to a mind but not to control. As long as faith is not an individual issue in our countries, or if we don't have other vision, nobody can talk about enlightenment. The other condition is to believe that the mind complete the revelation, because many ideas say that the mind is against the revelation. and that the idea of each time has its own conditions and circumstances, and it's up to the mind. And many verses from the Quran that talk about thinking, about logic, there are many of them, but in the literature of terrorist and violent groups, they always use the brain, the mind, as something against revelation. The other point is that we should take care of the awareness, ethical awareness. In the Muslim world, we can see in the books there is a lack in ethical issues. Many religious opinions, if somebody talks about ethics as something missing in the life of the modern Muslims, they would be considered as giving ethics as an alternative for religion, as if religion does not call for ethics, as if the Prophet did not say that religion is the treatment. Or as the companion used to say, the best of you are those who have good ethics. And the Quran described the Prophet when saying, you have the best ethics. So they try to give us, we should go back to the ethical awareness, which means to follow the good deeds and to have a right consciousness when taking care. Everybody should take of each other. The master should take care of his servant, and the state should take care of its citizen. This is why the ethical awareness should be based on the idea of love. Our relationship with the world should be based on love and not on hatred or on violence. The fourth point, we should distinguish between religion and political authority. There is a difference, so much so that an Pakistani Islamic scholar wrote a research where he said that the tree forbidden in the Quran is the political authority. He was thinking the effect, the negative effect of conflict on power, how much it has affected the religion. Distinguishing between power and the religion is that religion should not be an ideology. And nobody should claim that it rules on the name of God, or it monopolized interpretation of the text, or that he was designated to apply the text, or that he belongs to the team that represents Islam. All those are false claims. This is why distinguishing between Islam and political authority is important. The other point is modernization of society. We cannot talk about enlightenment in a backward society where they still have all the traditional values. We should have the context mature for Islamic reform. Otherwise, we cannot move forward. And this is in fact why many Islamic scholars who wanted to achieve enlightenment and reform, they were moved away. Some of them were killed. We have a man in Egypt, nobody knows much about it. His name is Sheikh Abdul Muta'ali Sa'idi. All the people of enlightenment had followed him. He died and most of his books were not published. He was expelled from Azhar, and he had said, my books will be sold 50 years from my death. He died in 1966, and this year his books are sold on the streets of Egypt. There is a lot of enlightenment in his books. The Imam Muhammad Abdu was expelled from Al-Azhar, and when he had cancer, the the violent group said God is taking revenge on him. All those who were calling for enlightenment were excommunicated, and most of the extremist scholars tried to use the laymen against to brainwash them, and we need evolution in culture and to have a mature Islamic discourse, and so we can achieve social justice, because we can see lots of absurdity. I have prepared lately a research on the depth of the Muslim Brotherhoods in Egypt. We cannot achieve much if we cannot face these groups, if we have differences between all members of society, if we are selective in members, in those who should get different jobs, if we are not equal at the end. And to be short, the last point in my research was about reform, about teaching Islam and its instruction. There are sciences that should either followed by institutions deliberately, or they should be imposed on them by the state. I'm not saying that the state should prepare the curriculum, but those who make up the plans inside the educational institution, they should take care of the topic that are taught. Otherwise, the Islamic vision cannot move forward. Secondly, the studies of stories that belong to other religion can make us understand the extent of what has been entrenched in our history and our books, and does not allow anybody to claim at all that he is on the right path, and that the issue is relative, and that we have commonalities between all religions, especially in terms of values, or the 10 Commandments, which were engraved on the walls, and we have them in the Bible, and that's the science that talks about individual experience in a religion, and which should be the subject of study. It should not be a sacred phenomenon, but it should be a subject of studies, of scientific study, the effect of religion on society, and the effect of social development on religion. This way we can understand religion in a deeper way. To study history, and we can see that some wrote the history of the winners, and they said that that is their history, and that the history of Muslims is the way it was for the modern Muslims. So we should distinguish between Islam and the history of Muslim, and we should only teach the subjects in the right way. The other thing is the analysis of the language. I always asked in Al-Azhar, and in some lectures I gave in Al-Azhar, is that linguistics should be taught, because if it is used with its current tools in understanding religious text, many things will change and everything will melt down. The other thing is the anthropology science. Anthropology should be taught. We see the culture and tradition of societies has impacted some social phenomena, and they started having some sort of scarcity, The last thing is the science of antiquities. We have many antiquities in different civilizations. For example, we have in the pharaonic civilization a huge care about religion and the other world and the relationship between the master and the servant based on justice. The old master used to worship the sun and the river, and the servant used to worship the sun and to worship the river, and they also worship Pharaoh as long as he applies justice. And even they started at that time, they started teaching that phenomenon. When we look at the science of antiquities, that when Baisti wrote in his book, The Dawn of Conscience, he said that that civilization was based on ethical and human values, and it should... And they connected the sky with the earth, and we have the prophet Idris, who was the oldest prophet. The last thing is psychology. Psychology, because if we study psychology, we can see that part of attitude of a human being is because of genetics, and the other is based on the environment where the person grew up. The last thing I would say is what Ibn al-Qayyim said: is all of it is justice and is mercy. Anything from that we can apply justice on, and we can stop oppression, and anything different from that is not from Sharia. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ammar Ali Hassan, for your comprehensive vision for countering terrorist organization, with saying that these groups have only lies and myths, and we should expose them in front of societies, and we should also apply reform in society. Now I will call the last speaker in this symposium. His paper is entitled Political Islam Between Myth and the Reality. Praise be to God. I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi for his invitation. And first of all, I would like to talk about the origin of the Islamic groups. The political Islam started in Islamic states since the 20s of the 20th century, and its formation started in general because of the lack of development in Arab and Islamic state. The first expressions of political Islam was with the emergence of Muslim Brotherhood with Hassan al-Banna in 1924. The thinking of Hassan al-Banna was affected by Muhibb al-Din al-Khatib and Abu A'la al-Madudi, and all those were affected by the reformist Muhammad Abdu, but they moved away from his idea of being open to the West and benefiting from it, and they focused on fighting the West. And they started adopting ideas of Imam Ahmad bin Taymiyyah. With the emergence of the books of Sayyid Ahmad Qutb calling for violence in Arab and Muslim states and also in the West, and for going back to the first times of Islam in order to establish the real Islam as it was in the beginning. In the second part, the research talked about the continuous conflict in mixing religion and politics, and distinguishing politics from religion, and distinguishing between separating politics and Islam is important because it can allow development at all aspects. And it could be important to put an idea, an initial idea, saying that mixing what is religious and what is political was something ultimate because of the circumstances of development of societies and the human nature that try to find a place of the spiritual in life. For separating religion from politics, it is an important title for development in the Arab and the Muslim world. And as this separation in Europe was the way for scientific development and for moving forward, we can achieve this goal in Arab and the Islamic world and to have the same results. We should look at the goal of achieving separation between religion and the state as a method for a new renaissance, without thinking that such a separation will definitely mean keeping God away from the life of Muslim. And the civil state can solve many social problems resulting from what researchers call tensions of identity among Muslims. Thank you, Mr. Majid, where you talked about the relationship between the West and the path that the Muslim should follow to achieve development of the West. Now we're going to watch a short documentary about the book called The Mirage, and after that we'll open the floor for discussion. The Mirage, a new window for discussing the phenomenon of political Islam in the Muslim world. The book talks about the Islam promoted by different extremist groups that use their own agenda to interpret religion, and they kill all those who are against them. The writer, Dr. Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, in his book, is sounding the alarm about the widespread terrorism, as he did in the other book, when he warned Arab states in not understanding the dynamics of international relations in the time of globalization. With the same way, by making sure to have a safe generation, the writer can see a light at the end of the tunnel, and he looks at different gaps caused by extremist groups. The idea of the Mirage is based on many ideas. It has 4 chapters and the conclusion, and in the introduction he talks about the significance of the title The Mirage, and he gives a similarity between millions in Arab and Muslim states and those who are exposed to the phenomenon of Mirage. And he said that the approach used has nothing but with what the terrorist extremist organizations are using to promote their ideas. He says that these groups are using, what they are using is a mirage, a myth. The author also shows a contradiction between Islam as a moderate religion and the reality, which has lots of violence and extremism and many aspects that we have seen in the Arab and the Muslim world. In the first chapter, entitled Political Islam Between Reality and Myth, the author discusses principles and mechanism of political Islamist groups as a movement that uses religion for their own benefits, because these groups, by nature, they always wanted to reach power. The first part of the chapter explains the phenomenon, and in the second part he explains the reasons for the expansion of the extremist groups and how they benefit from the mixing of religion and the politics. The third part exposes types of political Islam. The fourth part focuses on criticism against extremist groups and in countries where they managed to reach power. This said you should exploit an Islamic phenomenon, but this phenomenon compromised the whole idea of Islam, because Islam now looks like it is separating. So exploit this phenomenon in Islam. Islam came first to put people together. Now Islam in the Muslim world exists to separate people. In the second chapter, religion and politics, historical reality and continuous conflict, the author tackles the mixing between politics and religion, and he gives a background of development of the conflict in the Muslim and in the West, in the Muslim world in the West, and then he moves to separation of religion and the politics in the West. He also explains the aspect of mixing religion with politics in the Muslim world and the agenda followed by certain groups to keep that mixing, and how such mixing could instill conflicts among societies. And even though this religion still exists in society and in institutions. The third chapter, titled Political Religious Groups, Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood from the birth and foundation and expansion, and he talks about the goals of the group and the idea and methodology of the group and the vision of the regime, and how they look how they view democracy until they reached power and they got involved in different institutions of government. And the author thinks that the ambition of Muslim Brotherhood of reaching power after the turmoil witnessed by some Arab states shows the interest followed by these extremist groups. What is happening in Sena as a result of the coup d'etat happens at the time. This will stop only when Abdel Fattah Sisi would give up. The fourth chapter, entitled Religious Groups, the Salafist thinking is considered by the author as an influential movement, and they all agree on certain things, but they have many differences among them in terms of the methodology and the goals, and he gives the biography of the leaders of the Salafists since 1911 until now in many Arab states, and it also talks about criticism of the Salafist thinking. In the 5th chapter entitled Political Religious Groups, the Soroion, the book talks about the movement of Soroist which emerged in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. He talks about how Muhammad bin Saud moved away from his groups and followed the ideas of Sayyid Qutb and basing the idea of the Imam Ahmad bin Taymiyyah. In the 6th chapter entitled Political Religious Groups, Jihadist Groups, the book tackles the emergence of the jihadist thinking and its development. It studies examples of extremist groups. The first part tackles the Al-Qaeda groups and its connection with jihadist extremist groups. In the second part, the Islamic State, Daesh, is discussed in terms of its birth and its foundation and the difference between it and Al-Qaeda and the reasons of the differences. In the 7th chapter, entitled Tendencies of the Opinion on the Religious Groups, a case study of inhabitants in United Arab Emirates, the author took a survey of the opinions of people about political groups, Islamic groups. Even though the samples of those who were surveyed practicing Muslim, they believe that there should be a separation between religion and politics. And it showed also that the knowledge of religious groups were not significant. And they know more about Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and they also noticed that the experience of those groups those experiences failed, and they believe that those groups have no future for ruling in the Muslim and Arab world. In the conclusion, the author tackles the factors of failure of the extremist groups and for failing to adapt with modernity, for being self-isolated, for not allowing other new ideas, and for being against scientific development, and for not using their minds, and for promoting some backward idea that have no justification, no religious or political justifications. Now we open the floor for discussion. If you have questions or comments, and please make it concise so we can get as many questions as possible. Praise be to Allah, and first of all, I would like to thank Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research for inviting us to attend this symposium. Anyway, the sound is not good. First of all, I would like to thank the Emirates Center for inviting me, and thank you, Dr. Jamal Al-Suwaidi, for your book. I took a copy of it. I hope I can read it from the cover to the cover. It was good. We had good presentations, and the speakers gave us invaluable ideas. It was an additional knowledge to us. But one question, anyone can answer the question. Don't you see that not all the blame should be on those Islamist groups, but there are states, there are regimes, Arabs or Westerns who adopted those groups so they can achieve a political agenda on the some goals, even some specific leaders, so they can stay in power. Don't you see that adopt this kind of adoption? Me as a policeman, I know that all the warning of policemen. We used to be told that policemen are just hating those extremist groups. I would like to hear your comment. Wasn't there, my question, wasn't there some states, some regimes who adopted those extremist groups for a hidden agenda? Just to be faithful, I do not agree with many of what the other speakers said. I disagree with maybe 90% of what they said, and sorry for being bold. It is wrong to attack Islam without knowing Islam. This is the biggest mistake. So if I want to attack something, I should be able to eject it. So I am saying I disagree with them. The second point is what His Excellency Abu Faiz said. We all read about the mosque of Dara in the Surah of At-Tawbah. This man, the man built a mosque. He built a mosque with the support of Jews, and he wanted it to be a stronghold where the hypocrites would meet. So they came to the Prophet Muhammad and they said, come and lead us in our prayer. And the Prophet said, I will lead the prayer after I come back from the conquest. And God revealed the Surah of Quran calling for demolition of the mosque. So we have this idea. The Jews built a mosque in order to invade Islam. So we can imagine, for example, for ISIS, who is supporting ISIS? The Muslim Brotherhood, who is supporting it? We had Hassan al-Banna, he was getting his salary from the UK, and we have documents that support that. So these groups, they are supported by other groups in order to attack Islam. If I want to attack a family, I would attack the son of the family. So what we see is that these groups, they were based with external support. Before answering the question, I would like to say none of us attacked Islam. We are all Islam. We are all Muslims. What we are asking for is to get Islam out of the political discourse. I am still teaching Islam, and I'm teaching political sciences. It is social sciences that has its own principles, its own literature, it has its own mechanisms. The driver of a truck cannot fly a plane, otherwise the plane would crash. Likewise, those working in political sciences, they should have their own rules, they should have their own features that would allow them to shoulder responsibility. Using religion in politics poses a danger to religion and also to politics. And likewise, using politics in religion would be a danger to politics. Politics is the art of managing difference, but religion is not the same. I was happy when I heard one of the biggest Islamic scholars, Mitwalli Ash-Sha'rawi. He is an Islamic scholar. Islam unifies, does not split. Islam is a light that God wanted to be a mercy for all the world, not to be the reason of separation. This is why we're asking to get the religious field out from the political field. Societies now need food, need work, need medicine. If you come to Morocco, if you go to mosques, you will find the mosques are full. And I agree with you in the story you said about the Prophet Muhammad, about the mosque that was built, as God had said in a Quranic verse. So he is citing a Quranic verse from the Quran. So for politics, there are rules, there are mechanisms. The entities that show these are the political parties, and according to definition, political parties crystallize the demands of society, and they fight against each other in the political arena based on political programs. When you follow a religious program and you have different people who follow you who don't know the foundation, then you will get in a big trouble. God wanted Islam to be a religion of mercy. Al-Baghdadi was born among the Muslim Brotherhood. The problem is that when you have religious factors that mix with political factors which have different determinants, then we'll have lots of problems. Going back to your important question about the blame on these groups, in fact, there are many factors that led these groups to see lights. It's not that they were exploited by some regimes, but there are many factors. Under Ikavanye and me, we wrote a book 4 years ago. We called it The Constitutional Maghreban Regimes in Light of the Arab Spring. We studied, we had a comparative study between Morocco and Egypt and Tunisia since the independence, and we applied the rules of political science in this study. The reasons, if we look at them, we will find in details, sometimes it is the lack of opening to the liberal arena, the lack of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence among the Islamic stakeholders themselves. So when we have this element, we get all the viruses, because we are not using logical tools. We are using tools that are not subjected to mind. The conservative parties in the 17th century, they were religious parties. They were ruling based on religion. But when they got involved in the political arena and they were confronted with the economic They started fighting, they started defending the aristocrats and the religious scholars, the religious people, and it was clear to them that working with democratic tools from the religious and the aristocratic perspective was wrong. So they started getting close to the poor people, and they started slowly to give up the religious field, and they became conservative, atheist political parties. Because the political arena at the time, especially in the UK, which is the oldest democracy in the world, the political arena at the time was determined by strong mechanism. And when we don't have, when I talked about possible scenarios, I talked quickly about what should be fixed inside the political arena and education and training, so we can reform everything, because cutting wings of the virus cannot fix everything. Just to be understood in the right way, what was said in this symposium was not a discourse on Islam. We are in a center of studies, we are not in a mosque. This is why when I get questions like this, I distinguish between religion and sciences of religions. There is no difference on religion, and what we said was in defense of Islam. The Islam religion has been a victory, but when we pretend to be religious, we have people who would try to use religion for commerce, and the commerce in religion is one of the most beneficial trades. And religion also can become a psychological factor among other people. These are problems of interpretation of religion. The sciences of religion is the other sciences, like science of interpretation, science of hadith, science of theology, and then we have obligating people to follow religion in a certain way. So all this element should not be sacred, because they are human produce. What is sacred is religion. So if we have scholars and sheikhs who studied in the colleges and institute, like when I talk with Sheikh Ahmed Tayyib, many times, many scholars studied these sciences and the history and the comparative religions, of which I talked. We would not be able to ask the question again and hold somebody responsible for talking about political Islam. For your question, definitely regimes are responsible in many aspects. They are responsible for dealing with this organization, and responsible for opening the opportunity for them to expand. If we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood as the mother organization from which political Islam emerged, and we have that in the book, the Mirage. The Muslim Brotherhood, when they appeared, we have two versions. The first version said that Hassan al-Banna wanted to create a an organization that would call for Islam. And the second version said that from the first time the man was an employee. But what happened in history, and what Tariq al-Bishri thought himself, and he is close to that organization in his book, The National Movement in Egypt, he gives evidence that minority political parties used Muslim Brotherhood to attack national parties, and that some ministers were asked to attack some hospitals, some ministries that were supported by the other parties. And we have Ismail Se'i Basra, who was the prime minister and who have opened offices for Muslim Brotherhood. And they wanted to attack the national movement, and the English had used them in that sense. And we had the Egyptian students who used to demonstrate against the British occupation, and lots of groups used to go to the streets, and they were defending, other groups were defending the English occupation. And Egyptians will not forget Ismail Sadqi, who we had the speaker of the Brotherhood. His name was at the square of Ismailia. He made a speech, and he used the Quranic verses, and he applied it on Ismail Sidqi. I met Muhammad Osman Ismail before his death. He was the governor of Asyut. He was the engineer responsible for using extremist organization. He opened an office for them next to the office of the dean of the faculty, and those extremist groups were allowed to attack the liberal students, and those movements were exploited to serve the rightist movement of Sadat, and also to attack the leftist of Egypt. Mubarak also did the same thing. He used to say, if you want to live democracy, a Muslim Brotherhood will take over. When the state stopped delivering services to the poor people in light of the structural adjustment, we should not forget the experience of jihad in Afghanistan. American intelligence were using Muslim from all over the world. Some countries were paying money in order to fight the Soviet Union. There is a book of the French foreign minister where he talks about how we can fund the jihad fund, and he was giving a suggestion for the Afghan mujahideen to sell the drugs in order to fund that fund. I think his name was Louis Fabian. Now we all write and say that ISIS is not an innocent phenomenon. ISIS that now is taking over almost half of Iraq or Syria. Dr. Abdul Abu Masih, he talks about the functional groups, saying that there are some groups that are used in some countries, and now it is beyond groups. They have states who are playing that role for the benefit of other Western states, and the political Islam is ready to ally even with the devil, and they find this window to use it. This is not self-made, but this is made by some regimes, and some regimes are giving more expansion for these groups. I have a problem with time, but I will be concise. Our problem is that we mix between the good Islam and the bad Islam. So putting Islam in, it's like having a baker who would come to me and excommunicate me. That's wrong. For the quote of Al-Sha'awi, that Sha'awi, he was applying to those who separate religion from politics, but that quote was not full. Please, if you have questions or answers, make it very short, because we have something else after the symposium. I would like to congratulate His Excellency Dr. Jamal Suwaidi for his important book. And in my opinion, I see that he is making Islam innocent from those who pretend to be Muslims. My question is that these groups are using Islam in their discourse and in their expansion. Don't we need an Islamic discourse, a different one, to counter these groups? And what kind of discourse should it be? And what are the other factors that could help the Islamic discourse, the next Islamic discourse, for facing this and mitigating this phenomenon? First of all, I know I would like to say, don't feel bad about what I'm going to say. Doctor said that there is no model for Islam in politics. How is that? We have the Prophet, his companion Abu Bakr, Uthman, Ali. We have different models. So Abu Bakr, he was an efficient political man, and Umar ibn al-Khattab, he used to embrace different religions, people from different religions, so to attack Islam because of the attitude of certain group. That's wrong. Saying we need a new Islamic discourse, that's wrong. No, we need the original Islamic discourse that was used by the Prophet. That's what we need. But talking about a new Islamic discourse, that's something that does not exist. I am not asking you to go back to the medieval times. Maybe 90% of you would disagree with me, but when I have somebody who say, I don't want Islam to be involved in politics, this means that you don't want to hear the commandments of God in politics. Because when God came with his moderate discourse, he knew that there's differences between minds and he wanted to unify them. So they're not, even for those who had to adopt Islam, they were not forced to adopt Islam. So we see that people are trying to move some parts of Islam, the foundations of Islam. We need to get back to the original Islam as it was in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. the differences between religious and Islamist groups, this is not something to blame on Islam. This was very short.
انت بالذات ما اقدر اخالفك. لا يعني خلينا نتكلم بصريح العباره.
Allow me to talk frankly. The time of the Prophet is over. It was a time where there was no conflict. It was for a prophet who was immune when ruling became a matter of politics. After the end of the prophets, then we had the companions. So in the time, in the beginning of Islam, there was no conflicts. So in my opinion, politics is something and Islam is something different. The question of no.
يتحول النقاش مفارش بس أرضى يتحول النقاش بين أحد المتحدثين وأحد المشاركين.
Please don't make it a specific discussion between both of you. What I am saying is that in the beginning of Islam is that the prophecy was over and the message of the Prophet Muhammad was clear, and Muslims started the political process. We started seeing conflicts about those who would take over from the Prophet. So we should not claim that when politics got involved in Islam, it did not create conflicts. Yes, politics created conflicts in Islam. This is my opinion. Politics should be away from Islam. Islam should be for God, and politics should be for ruling the states. Thank you, General. But I would like to say that the best outcomes from the book is this conflict, this healthy discussion. But I think that the extremist groups mentioned in the book are using such conflicts happening between researchers and authors to mislead the opinion and the youngsters. So I hope you will give specific and short questions on the book because we are discussing ideas of a writer, and we don't want to have big discussions about Islam as a religion. Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Thank you for this interesting symposium. I am Dr. Mustafa from the Ministry of Defense. Thank you for this excellent symposium where we are saying this conflicting opinions, and we hope the good health for the author of this book, and we congratulate him not only for the book but also for the title. And Dr. Ammar explained 12 reasons for choosing this title. Our problematic is generalization. You said that there is a problematic in the Arab world and among the Arab researchers and academics about forecasting the future. And what we have is problematic between theory and practice. And we hope that those who can adopt those ideas do it. For you, Dr. Ammar, we got into the definition of the Middle East and the Arab world, but now there is nothing called the Arab world. We talk about the Middle East, the problematic of using the political Islam. Sheikh Wasim has also some reserves on that. We don't want to entrench these names of political Islam, social Islam. We might have some groups who would be away from the general path. We have a diagnostic in the book, but there is the enlightenment that you talked about. It was very interesting. It was more academic, but we need a work plan that it should start from the basement. We need work actions in the short and long term so we get out of this dark tunnel. The idea of generalization is something wrong in political sciences. I go back to the idea of political parties, and I will use the Algerian and Tunisian experience as example. Algeria got independence in 1962, and it lived under the army and the National Party from 62 until 1989. They had the evolution of Ba'ed, and the National Party wanted to open the door for others. But the political environment was corrupt. So there was a national party of SQ that was established, but in Algeria they had nothing such as a social contract. And when the National Party won, they started talking about moving the army from power, and there was a conflict in which thousands of lives were lost. The Tunisian experience, Tunisia got independence in 1959, and Habib Bourguiba had no religious legitimacy. He was a lawyer, and he contributed from Radio of Paris, and when he became president of Tunisia, his legitimacy was obtained from the party. So he was the leader of the state and the leader of the party, and no other party could get in his place. And this did not happen for the party of Nahda. It was not created by the state. Its members were in Paris. Generalization, if we talk about the Egyptian experience in using or creating or exploiting political parties, but to generalize, that's not the essence for explaining the existence of these parties in the Arab world. For the idea of forecasting the future, we're still very weak in that area in the Arab world. If you visit the events, the places in UK, in France, in Canada, in the US, you will see that they work day and night using principles of social sciences and political sciences in hundreds of pages, and they summarize it in 1 or 2 pages and they send it to the White House. And decisions are made based on those reports. Who does that in the Arab world? We still did not establish an elite of strategists, thinkers aware of those rules that would help the decision makers to make the right decision. And this is what I'm asking for. I'm asking the political parties. If you take, for example, the last election in the UK, between the Labour and the Conservatives, the conflicts were about employment, about the infrastructure, about contribution of the state in social security, about schools that would accommodate students for 2025, the question of equity. Those are the issues that are tackled for the general interest of the citizen in the day-to-day lives. But if we involve religion in those political parties, and it becomes a party that calls and say, I am a religious party, then the other parties in the West, they would move the cover of religion. But if they put a religious party, they would have a virus. We have parties of the left, parties of the right, the parties. All the parties, they conflict. They have conflicts, but try to see which one of them would do better. And we have a hadith of al-Bukhari in that sense. In the political field, there are rules. This is what I wanted to repeat, and thank you. In general, I am against using the term of political Islam, and I said that when the book talked about political Islamist group, and Dr. Sayyid Said tried to use another term, saying groups with Islam support. And I started thinking about the groups used in the book, the Mirage. I thought they are political parties and they are using religion. Our problem, in fact, concerning the Islam as a comprehensive Islam is that we have some groups claiming that they have such comprehensive Islam, or that they are the only ones who apply that comprehensive Islam. When the Muslim Brotherhood started, they said they would have Sufism, they would have companies, they represent all manifestations of Islam. Now it is time to deconstruct that comprehensive Islam. If Islam has aspects of economy, then that should be delegated to experts in economy. If there are aspects of sociology in Islam, that should be the subject of experts of sociology. The problem is that some speakers, some scholars, or some groups think that this comprehensive Islam lies inside them, and they're looking for power, and they fight for power because they think that the ruler should belong to those groups, thinking that because they don't have faith in the other rulers, and instead of using peaceful ways for change, like establishing political parties or calling on some activist groups, they use the weapons in order to attack the regime. Last thing is that I see that separation between Islam and politics is different, and the same applies to other religions. Separation between religion and politics, even Buddhism or other religion, that's not possible, because politics and religion, they meet each other in different ways. But politics is the general vision of society without involving religion. But the problem with extremist religion is the separation. is separation between religion and political authority, because we have other authorities like social or economic authorities. The experience of the companions, if you want to learn about what they used to do, like Muhammad bin Bakr as-Siddiq, and he participated in the killing of another one for the sake of authority. And when we look also and how they used to fight others in order to get something and give it to their enemies. And some of them stayed until death without nominating Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And the conflict was solved in a different way. Abu Sufyan had said to the uncle of the Prophet that it is a prophecy. The Quran did not address the Prophet as a king, as in the same way he addressed Sulaiman. And the Prophet, when he was dying, he ordered Abu Bakr to lead the prayer, and he did not offer him papers or anything for managing the affairs of society or of the state at the time. Those are clear issues, but it is the political authority that came, and I invite Sheikh Wasim to read something very important called Sultanic literature. It's about many scholars who wrote books on caliphs for Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas. Those books are very similar to the book of Machiavelli, The Prince. It is very close to it, and when some of them used to give advice, the goal was not justice, but to extend the life of ruling. This is something dangerous. To use religion for authority, for political authority, is very dangerous, and political authority was a bad danger for all religions. At the end of this symposium, I would like to thank all of you on the name of His Excellency Dr. Jamal Al-Suwaidi. Now I invite you to eat lunch and see you another time. Thank you.